welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us at our Lunch and Learn today, where we'll be looking at pensions and investments and be hearing from Make My Money Matter and where you bank matters. On to this session and why it's a really important topic. Many of the small businesses we work with are measuring and reducing their carbon footprint, and all of them want to act to be more sustainable and act in a more sustainable manner. But one of the areas that often gets overlooked are businesses, or in fact individuals' carbon footprints from financial investments. It's quite an elusive area. It's not something that has a kind of evident carbon output, such as with driving a car or flying a plane. So it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. But actually, they have quite a large impact on the environment, which is what we'll be covering today. So that's why we're really, really excited to be hosting Make My Money Matter today to explain the importance of banking and why it should be part of your thinking, especially if you're in an organisation that's thinking about working towards net zero or that's already on their journey. So we're joined by Tony, the CEO at Make My Money Matter today, and I will pass over to Tony to do an introduction and to and continue with the session. So thank you, Tony.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Laura, and thanks everybody for joining this session. So, yeah, I'm Tony Burdon. I'm the CEO of Make My Money Matter. In my sort of past, I've worked mainly in international development. I worked for Oxfam for a long time, and then I went into the UK Treasury, and then as a senior civil servant, I went into the Department for International Development. And it was in my last jobs there that I was focused on how we could mobilize investment into developing countries to create jobs, create goods and services, but also to tackle the climate emergency. And we were using UK aid and UK instruments to try and do that. And while I was working on that, I met with Richard Curtis and his team. And he also was very interested in the power of money. As you know, Richard Curtis, he's a film director, Love Actually, all those kind of well-known movies, but he's also the co-founder of Comic Relief. And he's also the UN Secretary General's spokesperson on the Sustainable Development Goals and communicating those goals globally. And with Comic Relief, there was a small scandal where the media, a journalist had spotted that Comic Relief had invested some of its money into some investments that were also invested in weapons. And they said, isn't that a contradiction? You know, you're a charity helping people in the UK, helping people in Africa, but you're also financing weapons. And Comic Relief was shocked, and they rapidly cleaned up their money and made sure none of it was invested in weapons or other things that was causing harm to the people Comic Relief was trying to help. And that was a shock for Richard. And he also then looked at his own money. He was also stunned when he saw a TED talk by Dr. Bronwyn King, who was a cancer doctor. And she had her checkup with her financial advisor. And one of the questions she asked was, oh, where's my money invested? And it turned out in the top 10 companies her money was invested in, 3 of those were tobacco companies. And she worked out that her money had killed more people than she had helped as a cancer doctor. And she was completely stunned by that. She didn't realize. And it's this notion that we find ourselves as individuals, accidental investors in things that don't align to our values. You know, we could be a vegetarian invested in meat farming, a pacifist invested in weapons, and someone bothered about the climate emergency invested in Shell and BP. And it's just the same if you're a business. There are thousands of businesses, large and small, trying to align their business to be more sustainable, to align with the values of the business. And they're not thinking about where their staff pension scheme is invested and their money going into that scheme and what impact that scheme has on the planet, on the environment, on people. And they're also not thinking about their bank account and how banking with that bank, in a sense, gives it permission to operate as it does. And it turns out our high street banks are also financing the climate emergency that we see around us. So these sort of insights led us to think about a campaign to try and call on our pensions and our banks to invest more sustainably and in line with the values of the people whose money it is. And we launched Make My Money Matter in 2020. Mark Carney, who's the ex-Bank of England governor, is a big fan of ours, and he helped us launch it with Richard and a number of pension funds. And we launched in 2020. And we started our work with a focus on pensions. And we were thinking about how our pensions align with our values as an individual or as a business. But it also turned out that 2020 was the sort of run-in to the UK hosting COP26, the big global climate conference. And at the same time, we were starting to see the climate emergency more visibly around us. And so what we decided at that time was to switch from thinking about tobacco and weapons, decent working conditions. Our money's invested in companies that many of them don't treat their workers well. Instead of that broad spectrum of values, we focused then on climate and deforestation, and we focused on calling on pensions to align to net zero. And we said, right, we'll engage the public in thinking about their pensions and understanding it better. Pensions are probably the most boring thing in the world. They're also one of the scariest, in part because we all know we're not saving enough for our retirement, and that worries us. We don't understand pensions, and in a sense, we'd rather not look at it. But we've tried to help people understand their pensions and help businesses understand the power of their pensions too. So I wouldn't mind now just showing you a short, fun video, a way that we've engaged with people, and then I'll dive into a bit more detail about our pensions and their impact. But if we could show that video, Laura, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm Guy Byrne-Woods, CEO of the Forestry Felling Syndicate. On behalf of the global logging industry, I want to thank people like you for collectively investing hundreds of millions with us. Your pension funds, no matter how piddly, all add up. And with all your cash, we've been able to destroy more natural habitat than we ever thought possible. From Alaska to the Amazon, Siberia to Sudan. Synergy. We've also used your investments to fight pesky government restrictions. In fact, every single minute, we managed to clear about 30 football fields of forest. There goes another one. But we can only keep up our record-breaking work with your help. With your continued investment, we can do even more together next year to make money and destroy the planet. So remember, your money is literally changing the world. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Great, thanks, Laura. Cool. Okay, so if we just turn to the next slide, that video that we've shown has been seen 5 million times, and so we've been very lucky with Richard Curtis. He's managed to bring celebrities like Jason Isaacs in that video. He was Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies, if you didn't recognize him, and he worked for us for free to do that video. So bringing a bit of celebrity, a little bit of fun, but getting a stark message across has been a great way to engage a wider public about something really complicated like pensions. And research that we've done shows that 2 of every £10 in a UK pension is invested in companies where there's a high risk of causing deforestation. And one of our campaign asks is to get pension funds to have a proper policy on how they manage deforestation and to eliminate it in their portfolio. And that's a big part of the climate challenge. But just going on to pensions and diving in a bit, we've got 3 trillion in UK pensions. So just imagine if we could get that invested in the right way. So one of the bits of work we did with Aviva was try and understand, the impact of a pension compared to some of the actions people take in their everyday lives, whether that's becoming a vegetarian or stopping flying or getting a renewable energy provider. And we compared a standard pension fund against a sustainable pension fund and looked at the difference in emissions. And it turns out that that difference was 21 times more than the reduction in emissions that you might take with an average person if you stop flying or you go vegetarian and you switch to a renewable energy provider combined. And really, it was a fantastic piece of work that just showed the power of our money invested every day, every year, for tens of years, and the impact it has. And it was trying to remind people that while they're doing all those fantastic things, they need to think about their money. And then we thought about, well, what does that look like for a business? So we looked at the FTSE 100 businesses, and we did this work with Scottish Widows. They funded the research. And we found out for FTSE 100 businesses, when you look at the company's carbon footprint, their pensions footprint is 7 times that of a company. So it's again thinking, and highlighting to the businesses to not forget about the money they put into their pension and the impact that has on the planet. Now, this work, getting the public more involved, writing to their pension fund, the working with businesses, where in the end we got over 120 businesses to sign up to a green pensions charter. And those businesses committed, and they did this publicly, to ensuring that the pension they offered their staff was committed to align to net zero, including halving emissions this decade. And what we saw is that pressure from individuals writing to their scheme, the pressure from these companies demanding better pensions from pension providers, coupled with the media spotlight that we got by having celebrities like Jason Isaacs do videos for us, or just Richard being engaged. We had so many headlines in the Mail, the Express, the Mirror, the Sun, where a headline would say, pensions actually, it'd have a picture of Hugh Grant, and then it would say Richard Curtis, director of Love Actually, is part of a campaign called Make My Money Matter. And then the story would go into helping people understand the impact of their pension. And so this media spotlight, pressure from pension savers, pressure from companies, put pressure then on the industry. And that industry I meet pension funds on a regular basis to try and persuade pension funds to shift in the right way, saw us achieve getting 60 pension funds in the UK to commit to net zero, including halving emissions this decade. An absolutely fantastic commitment. And that's about 1.5 trillion of assets under management. So over half the money now in UK pensions is committed to align to net zero. That's great. The thing now is to make sure they actually do that year on year, drive down those emissions. And so last year we released a climate action report, which ranked the top 20 defined contribution pension providers. And that put huge pressure on the industry. Suddenly, there was a public ranking of them. And some businesses we know, Ella's Kitchen, for instance, which is a small B corporation that makes baby food, they switched their pension from one of the worst performing in our ranking to one of the best. The pension company that took on their new business paid for the transfer of all of that. And what staff said to the business was, that's one of the best things you did for us that year. We've now got a pension that we can feel proud of, that we know is invested in the right way. Another pension provider took that climate action report where they'd scored really badly. They took it to their senior management and said, look, we're scoring badly in a public ranking. We need more people in our sustainability team, our climate team, our nature team. And they got them. They went from 2 people up to 7 in their sustainability team. And it means now they're accelerating the actions that pension fund is doing to tackle climate change. So we're making progress. You know, there's a lot more to do, and I'll come on later to tell you what I think you could do more on this. We'll publish a new climate report for next year that will have looked at performance this year. Which magazine has already said it's going to publish it for us, which is fantastic. But I also want to get it out to every company in Britain so that they're better informed about the choice they make about the pension fund that they provide their staff. But if we turn to the next slide, Laura, as we made progress on pensions, we wanted then to think of, okay, where else is there a lot of money that people have a connection to, that companies have a connection to? And it's your bank, whether it's an individual bank account or a corporate bank account that you have. And we looked at the 5 high street banks, Barclays, HSBC, Santander, NatWest and Lloyds. And it turns out that, you know, between 2016 and 2022, those banks put over $400 billion into oil and gas companies, 140 billion into the top expanders. Now, we know we need oil and gas for the next 20 years or longer, but it needs to be at reducing levels as renewable energy provision starts to grow and increase and accelerate, as we adopt more electric vehicles and lots of other climate solutions that are accelerating and happening at scale. So we know we need oil and gas. So putting money into oil and gas is at one level okay, but it shouldn't go to oil and gas companies that are planning to expand production into the future, because we know we need to reduce emissions. And the International Energy Agency has said very clearly over the past few years that there should be no new oil, gas or coal expansion, exploration, development if we have to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, you're all, you know, you look out the window and you've all seen here in the UK and internationally that even at 1.2 degrees, which is where we are now, we're seeing a climate catastrophe actually happen. Wildfires in California and Australia, floods in Pakistan, all of these things are happening, and they're going to get worse. So what do you do when you know it's going to get worse? You need to act. And the problem is oil and gas companies, the majority of them, are actually planning to expand because they're hoping they can continue to make a lot of money over this period. And our banks are financing that. So we launched a banking campaign asking banks to not finance any oil and gas company that has plans to expand. And we called on them to do that. And as a first step, to stop direct project finance. The bulk of their money is corporate finance to the whole company, underwriting and other financial instruments. And then there's a bit of that is directed directly at projects. And what we saw is that, you know, again, we launched video with celebrities. We got an open letter signed by a range of celebrities and climate activists and others, and got a lot of coverage. Again, more pressure on the banks. Saw Lloyds make a first step on direct project finance, then HSBC, and then NatWest. So we've made a little bit of progress, but it's definitely not enough. So we're still early in this stage of trying to get the banks to shift. We're in conversations with all of those banks, talking to their sustainability teams, their climate teams, urging them to do more, and there's still a lot to do. We've now then started to engage with NGOs. So a lot of the development organizations that work internationally, a lot of them bank with Barclays, because Barclays has an incredible network and can make payments, for instance, to staff in Afghanistan, even in terrible, difficult conditions. So it's quite an efficient bank, but unfortunately, it's the biggest bank in Europe financing fossil fuel expansion. And they're doing that because they just make so much money out of it. So we're working with NGOs who are looking at switching their bank, who are lobbying Barclays to do better. We also, I wrote to almost 100 universities a few weeks ago, where we'd done freedom of information requests. And we found that of those universities, nearly 100, they've all made commitments to divest their endowments, which are invested to get returns such that it helps finance university activity. They've all committed to divest from oil and gas after decades of students campaigning. But it turns out while they've done that, they're still banking 75% of them with Barclays. So again, it's this contradiction. As a university, they're divesting from oil and gas, but their bank isn't. In fact, their bank is accelerating the expansion of oil and gas. So we're engaging now with the universities, and we hope that they will ask Barclays to stop, and if Barclays doesn't stop, to look at alternatives that can provide them with the banking services they need. And if we go to the next slide, Laura, the next slide, it's a little bit too detailed to see on the screen, but this was published by Which magazine just a week or so ago. And you can see that it's trying to help people think about, okay, what kind of bank could I be with if I want a greener bank? And you can see lumped at the bottom there in red, little red bars, are Barclays and HSBC, Lloyds, NatWest, Santander, and also JP Morgan Chase, because Chase has been very aggressive in the past year in trying to expand its customers in the UK. All of those banks are financing oil and gas companies that are expanding, don't care about their impact on climate, and are making a lot of money out of it. Then on the left, you've got green bars. So you've got Nationwide, the Co-op, and Triodos are all green. They're clear of fossil fuel investments. And in fact, Triodos, for instance, is, the whole of that bank, all of its investments are green investments. The Co-op, no fossil fuels, but also very ethical with regards to weapons and other things. And Nationwide, because it's a building society, doesn't invest in businesses anyway. And then you've got some of the other banks at the top, a little bit around the sort of tech banking, where, it's not quite clear where they are on net zero, but they're not doing lots of investments anyway. So that's now getting out to people. And I think, for companies, the same kind of decisions are there around sort of what you do. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll touch a bit on what businesses can do about all of this. So, many businesses signed up to our Green Pension Charter. You're still able to do that. But if you don't want to, but you're still bothered about your pension, the first thing to do is have a look at it. Ask your pension provider, have they made a commitment to net zero? How ambitious is it? And what progress are they making in acting on that? And if you're not happy with that, then you could get financial advice and move your scheme, or threaten to move your scheme. Our climate action report might help you to do that. And I'll make sure, Laura, that you could share a link to that report after the session. But the thing is to ask. And if you're not happy, then just move it. As a company, you're able to do that. And as I said with Ella's Kitchen, the company they transferred to paid for all the transfer costs. So there's no negative impact on you as a business, nor on your staff who are saving into that pension. And then you've moved into a pension fund that's more serious about the climate emergency and willing to use their money to tackle it. And then on banking, it is a bit more complicated. So, if you, in our pensions campaign, we haven't campaigned for people to switch pensions. What we've tried to do is get people to demand that their pension changes. If we'd campaign on switching, I think we'd have got hundreds of thousands switching, but actually we wouldn't have been moving that mass of money and get it invested in the right way. By demanding it changes, you change that money and you change the way it's invested. So with banks, I think the thing to do, I imagine all of you will be with the 5 high street banks. It'd be great to know if any of you aren't. And they'll provide, good services to you. as a business. So the first thing to do is to ask them to stop financing fossil fuel expansion and ask them what they're doing about that. And if you're not happy with their reply, tell them then you're not happy and put them on notice that you may leave. And ultimately, if it's not good enough, then leave. The one challenge around that last point is, where do you go to? So clearly you've got the co-op provides banking services for small businesses. Triodos at the moment have closed their business account. They're investing millions in upgrading it, and I think they'll launch a new offer in about a year or a year and a half. So it is quite hard to find somewhere you could go to that gives you the services you need. So that remains a bit of a challenge. We're hoping that Lloyds and NatWest, who of all of them, oil and gas is a very small part of their overall investment business. We're hoping they might make the final shift to excluding oil and gas companies that aren't serious on climate. And then if they do move, you're in a position where then you could move to a high street bank that has all that corporate capability, but actually is not investing in fossil fuel expansion. But there's a challenge around that. So two things, and in the Q&A we could dive into some of that as well. And then just thinking of individuals, if we go to the next slide, Laura, it's the same kind of thing, which is just, we're trying to get people to have a look at their bank, have a look at their pension, having a think about whether they're happy about what that bank or that pension fund is doing. Demand that their employer, chooses a better bank or a better pension provider, or take action themselves if they can. Write to their pension fund, write to their bank demanding change. Thousands of people are doing that, and then spread the word. It's just amazing actually that people just don't think about their money, whether they're an individual or a business. They're doing things to improve what they do as an individual, whether it's recycling, eating differently, flying less, all of those things, going by train more, but they forget about their money. And it's the same. Businesses are making a huge effort. We know this transition is going to happen. The struggle really is to make sure it doesn't happen too late. But businesses are a massive part of that solution, but forget about where their money goes, where they're banking, their staff pension and so on. So really it's asking all of you to take those actions and make your money matter. So thanks very much. I'll turn over to you, Laura, and really looking forward to any questions from everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. That's a really, really useful session, and so that our attendees can really see the huge impact that looking at your pensions and investments can have, and has really brought that to life with those figures and graphics with really useful links. As Tony's mentioned, we'll send links around in the post-event session as well, so that you so that you can all get access to those. We have had some questions coming in, so thank you for those practical questions. If we keep them on that vein, that will be really, really useful. So, the first one is based on some of the figures you shared, Tony. So, one of the stats on your slide was about how pension emissions of UK businesses are 7% higher than their company carbon footprint. So, I guess there's some stats people out there who have been asking, does that account for scope 1 and 2 of a company's carbon footprint, or is that the total scope 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, we looked. You all know data is very difficult to get, and it's an evolving area. So we looked at businesses' scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then compared it with the emissions of their pension, and it was really a data issue. And the thing is it's just to make the point. Your pension has a massive impact, and think about that, and then do something about it. But that's how we did it.
Thank you. That's really useful to know, and I think that shows the importance of businesses measuring their scope 3 emissions, as well as many are just starting on that journey after looking at their scope 1 and 2. As you say, the data's not there, and yeah, scope 1 and 2 is for anyone who isn't aware, are those emissions where you have direct control over them. So they're really kind of tangible elements, such as like changing your electricity provider, that you can do. And pensions is also something that you have control over, where a lot of scope 3 isn't. So it's really useful to put it in comparison of what you as a company control. So it is quite a startling stat that you shared. Another question is, do you have a ranking of the top pension providers? So in my head, I'm imagining something similar to that which kind of graphic that you shared. Do you have something like that?
Yeah, so our climate action report last year has a bit of a ranking. So just to say, we did that report internally last year, and it was the first year where many of the pension funds had actually published their TCFD reports. This is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So data wasn't brilliant. So what we did, instead of ranking them, we just listed them alphabetically, and out of 5 questions, we scored them with red and green marks. So we'll definitely share that with you after this, and you'll see it's sort of obvious who gets 5 red marks. Ideally, you don't want to be with those guys, and then there are some who get quite a lot of green marks. For this year, we've actually commissioned a sustainability sort of analytics company with very good reputation, who's done a lot of this analysis before, and they're doing the work for us. So it's going to be a lot more rigorous, and we've built in a good time period to test the findings with the pension funds themselves. And because we feel much more confident about that, we'll actually rank the pension funds. And so that will be a more accurate, kind of better way of doing it. But I think if you just look at our climate action report from last year, you'll get a very good feel for who's doing well and who isn't.
Thank you. That's really useful, and a kind of note to watch this space for the new report that comes out. But it will give everyone time to kind of gear up internally their businesses and exec leadership team, I guess, to making that switch, and then hopefully can have that really useful data. I guess on that vein as well, we've had questions around people looking that they want to switch their pension providers to a greener offer. And do you have any tips to help encourage employees to opt into this new pension provider? I know a lot of people, it has been, we offer kind of the pension provider we always have, but you can opt into a greener one. Is there ways that you can switch that? I know there's issues around that with employee engagement. So have you seen a really good example potentially as well with Ella's Kitchen, how they went about that?
Yeah, okay. So a couple of things there. Some pension providers, basically everyone goes into the default pension fund, right? That's where all of the money is. And that's their offer to you as a business. But some of those pension funds also have additional funds within their offer. So, for instance, I'm with Nest Pension. That's what we've used for Make My Money Matter. And then we all switch to their ethical pension fund. And other pension funds do provide that. But for you, you can only switch to that as an individual, and you have to make a choice about that. And ideally, you should seek financial advice so you know the implications. So what we know is most people will always stay in the default. The thing to do as a company is make sure that default is a good pension that's doing the right thing with regards to the climate emergency. In other words, it's committed to align to net zero, halving emissions this decade, and they're serious about delivering on that. So then you find yourself, say, with the pension fund that's not that serious, not that ambitious, and isn't telling you about the progress they're making, and you don't really have confidence that they're taking this seriously, then what Ella's Kitchen did, they got financial advice. They got their advisor to tell them who were the top 3 pension funds in the UK that were the greenest pension funds. And then they had a meeting with each of those 3 pension funds, got them to make a pitch, both in terms of their green credentials, but also their engagement with employees and all those other things. administration costs and so on. And then they said, right, we'd like to switch. The company they chose paid for the transfer, and then staff were delighted, the company's delighted. So that's how it would work if, as a business, you wanted to move from where you are into something that's much better. One other bit of advice: the thing, when you're, if you have a HR person or your chief financial officer looks at this, there's an issue about the cost of running the pension fund. So these are the fees that gets charged, and for workplace pension schemes, those fees have been capped at a certain level. That's good. It makes sure that excessive fees aren't being charged. The problem is that you get a bit of a drive to the bottom, a race to the bottom of cheap funds. Now, cheap funds where administration costs are cheap sounds good, but often they're invested in ways that aren't really ambitious about climate, but also in ways that aren't ambitious about getting good returns. So cheap pension funds doesn't mean they get the best outcome for pension savers in terms of having a bigger pot in the end. And there's a really good example with that, where Canadian and Australian pension funds, they invest a lot in infrastructure, including transport systems, all things which are projects that UK pensions generally are not investing in, but they get much higher returns. And this is a complex agenda, but all I would say is when you look at the cost of the pension fund, also make sure your priority is savings outcome for members. In other words, the returns they get, not the cost of running the fund. Cool.
Thank you,
Laura.
Thank you. Great. And a few questions coming in on this vein, so I'll pose it to you quickly. We have about a minute left for questions. Is around measurement. So pensions and investments are category 15 of your scope 3 emissions. They are within your scope 3. How would you go about measuring your pensions? Because you can't, to present sometimes ideas to senior leadership team or your CFO, it's good to have those tangible figures. So do you have any ideas on that? And then there's a suggestion of, if we took our scope 1 and 2 emissions and multiplied that by 7, would that just be a good starting point to guesstimate what our investment emissions are? So any calculators, or do you have anything to help?
No, I mean, we've used this as a way of just getting businesses to realize that their pension has emissions too, and then they should think about that when they're trying to reduce the emissions across their business. So we're a campaign, we're just trying to raise awareness and get action. So the sort of technical calculators and other things, we don't do that. If you're looking at your own company emissions, and if you've got a handle on that, what you can do or try to do is ask your pension provider to tell you. I'm sure they could do this, and it would be a good question to ask them, which is, given the amount of employees saving into their scheme, what's the sum total of those emissions? Mm-hmm. And that would be a good challenge actually to them, to let you know that. So that might be one way of doing it, which is asking the provider.
I would agree. Ask them, put the onus on them, and also if we hear of any calculators at Heart of the City which give a more approximate value, we do have a toolkit which kind of leads me on to my next segue, but where we share kind of organisations that can help you with lots of areas of net zero, one being measurement. So have a look at that, and we can post organisations in there. But thank you, Tony.